This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the DRF Players Podcast. I do believe this show is number 267. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatel, back with you on this Friday, September 8th for the new edition of the show. A little bit different stuff going on today. We've got a special guest. We're going to introduce a new topic a little bit later in the show. We've got Scott Gramling of the Platinum Sheet to talk about the NFL season. We'll close out with that. Before then, though, more of what you're used to. It'll be me and my intrepid co-pilot, the People's Champion, calling in from the planet Texas, Jonathan Kinchin, to talk about some horse racing stuff. JK, how are you doing today?
What's going on? I'm doing well. This is like that week of recovery, so I've been laying low, watching lots of movies, and trying to get my mind right for what's going to be a good conclusion to a good year.
I like the optimism and I like the attitude, and yeah, it is kind of funny. I feel like I spoke to you about 6 times a day for 6 weeks, and I haven't talked to you all week. I miss you, my brother. What's going on? What are you most looking forward to this fall? I'm
looking forward to Keeneland. I think the Keeneland Fall Meet's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to that. Unfortunately, there's some. It may not be the most friendly horse player meet, but I'm excited about watching the racing. The 2-year-old races, I think, will be fun leading into Breeders' Cup, and so looking forward to that. I'm excited about the Breeders' Cup. I think that's going to be a ton of fun, and I'm excited about getting Arrogate and Gun Runner in the gate together again. Hopefully, we'll see the real Arrogate and the real Gun Runner, and it should be a showdown that we'll remember for a long time.
Silly academic question, but we do that from time to time. We've got a horse racing podcast. If you had to vote today for Horse of the Year between Gun Runner and Arrogate, who are you pulling for?
Pulling for Arrogate. I would like for Arrogate to right the ship. I think it's a more fun story at this point. I mean, if Gun Runner runs in the Classic, wires the field, and Arrogate runs third, I don't think that's as great of a story than, as if, Gun Runner sets 48 and change, Arrogate looks done in the water, and he comes flying and wins by 3. I think that's more exciting for the sport, more exciting for Arrogate's legacy. So that's kind of what I'd be rooting for.
If I were voting today, however, I think I'd vote for Gun Runner. Mike Watchmaker had an interesting column saying he still thinks, based on the exploits early in the year, especially the head-to-head matchup in Dubai, that Arrogate would have the edge in his mind. For me, I have to defer to what we saw this summer, and I don't care what the figures say. Not the same Arrogate out there at Del Mar, and to me, a Gun Runner who's come on and just put up a couple of dominating performances in Saratoga that were impressive to both the eye and the clock. So that's where I would go right now. But I can't disagree with what you're saying, JK, from a narrative point of view about the Arrogate Gun Runner situation. What else is going on? Have you been following any other stories in the world of horse racing?
No, not really. I mean, honestly, I really have been laying low. I didn't play Kentucky Downs the first 2 days. I've just had too much other. It's funny when you're running around coast to coast, you end up kind of like putting like other things you probably need to be doing aside, and then once all that's over, you have to kind of like refocus on the things you need to do, like getting your oil changed and stuff like that. And so I had to take a break for a couple days just to kind of get life things in order. So
I've been doing much of the same. Lots of visits to the school, new school for Perrin, and it seems pretty cool. I'm not sure there's a horse player in the bunch among the other parents, but they all seem like nice people. I didn't get any question about a hat I wore with silks on it, though, so that made me a little concerned about how hip the crew is. How about you? How's the school situation been so far? Is this a new school for you?
Yeah, new school. I went to some meet the teacher situation last night, and I was the only one with pineapple shorts and tattoos. The rest were jeans, polos, suits, ties.
Suits and
the whole
ties
lot,
to meet the teacher. I'm not sure what point they're trying to make.
I think they came straight from work.
Oh, okay, that's legit. I was picturing the middle of the afternoon, and I was beginning to wonder about your fellow teachers. But you mentioned the pineapples. Of course, that makes me think of your outfit that was such a huge hit on the first edition of Win Play Show. What kind of feedback have you received about the show so far?
I haven't heard a lot. I mean, I've seen some stuff. I've gotten some messages, but I think the thing that I've seen probably, if I'm being honest, the most is like it felt really quick. Like it felt like really fast. Like I think maybe I think there was one of the early episodes they taped, so I think they probably worked through that as it got a little bit further along. I could even tell the difference on some of the things they did when we were taping later than early. So we'll see how it progresses. But I thought it was good visuals. A professional crew, so that's always good. I guess from a personal standpoint, I was a little bit disappointed. I said some really smart things, and they didn't use them.
You dictated though exactly. There was some race where you said, this is all about inside in the lead, and that's exactly how the race was run and won. I thought you'd be happy with that, but you gave a few more specifics. Is that what you're saying?
Oh my gosh! I told them I was adamant in the last race about them betting the Peter Miller, and then in the paddock. They had us kind of in the paddock doing some pre-stuff. They didn't even use it. Peter Miller walks by with his horse, and behind him is the only other horse that could really win, and it's Tyler Bays, and Tyler yells something at Peter, and Peter says, if we're not on the lead, we can't win.
Oh, interesting.
And so I was like, look, the trainer just said, if he's not on the lead, he can't win. So he'll take all doubt out of the fact that we were wondering what he was going to do. He's going to break. He's going to get to the good rail, and he's going to win. And they didn't use any of it.
I'll give two compliments or two nice things and one bit of constructive criticism on the show. I thought as much as it pains me to give you a compliment, JK, I thought in your segments you were excellent, short, to the point. Who knew the camera loved you? It really, I did enjoy it. The half hour did go very quickly. I'll also say this. I wouldn't get too hung up on judging anything about the show, remembering how the Horse Players TV show, how that evolved as time went on. And there were some weird things in early episodes and kinks that had to be worked out that by the time they got to mid-season and beyond were much better. My one piece of constructive criticism I'll offer, I did wish it was maybe a little more horse-centric as opposed to the horses were a little bit like ping pong balls in a machine generating a number. And I know it's hard. You can't really go into all those stories. But I wonder if as the show goes on, we could just get a little more horse-centric commentary as opposed to number-centric commentary. Fair?
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think there it was an idea that they ran with. I think that I kind of wish that the focus was more on
Jonathan
learning learning the game more than I feel like the first episode was a little bit more focused on the four people that didn't know what they were doing.
Right.
You know what I mean? And God bless them, but I wonder how engaging that will be for horse players. You know what I mean? And like I said, I think they'll change. I think that will evolve. I don't think it's going to stay that way. Because like I said, the interviews, the questions they asked changed as we went along from one week to the next. So we'll see.
Folks can tune in. The show is called Win Place Show. It's been running frequently on TVG. That's 413 on in the Time Warner Spectrum, whatever they're calling it, in the NYC metropolitan area. Go to the Win Place Show TV show. You can find local times website. Find local times in your area. Set your DVRs. Check it out. Be fun to watch as this evolves. Because we have Scott Gramling coming in a little bit later in the show, JK, I think we should just go ahead and dive in and do some handicapping. Have you had a chance to look much at this Saturday Kentucky Downs card?
I did. I did look. I didn't. I'm not like fully to the gills. Stopping at the Chase Bank on my way there to handicap. But I do have some or to bet. I do have some interesting thoughts. I did the late double for my out of the gate segment, and so I did look at those races. And so yeah, there's some things to talk about.
Excellent. I'll be honest with you. I've been running around like a chicken with my head cut off, and I just cracked the PPs for the first time since the show started. So I will be completely useless, but I will guide the conversation and take a look, and I'm going to know some of these horses, so maybe I'll have something of interest. If not, we'll let you drive. But I guess we should start off with this Grade 3, the Ladies Turf, Race 7, opening of the late pick 4. Does that sound about right?
Sounds about right.
Also, I should mention for folks interested in more on Kentucky Downs, if you're listening live, you can still tune in live at noon. I'm doing a handicapping session on this card with Byron King and CJ Johnson, and also our buddy, friend of the podcast, Jack Jenkins. So that should be fun, and a way folks can get extra info. If you can't tune in live, you can check out the archive of that, drf.com/YouTube. What were you saying, JK?
No, I thought we were hopping in, so I was just so anxious. Yeah. One of the things I would do first and foremost when you're looking at Kentucky Downs is I would take the top right corner where there's the graph on your PPs where it says, in lifetime, this year, last year, firm turf, off, blah. I would find where it says KD, and I would circle every horse that had won at Kentucky Downs. That'd be like the first thing I did when I got the form out. Circle all the ones that have won there, because I think it's a really, more than any place in the country, I think that horses that win there, it's really a turf, a turf course that you either like it or you don't. And so that's kind of my starting handicapping point when I'm doing. I'm going to try to beat Miss Temple City. I'm going to continue to try to beat her for a majority of the year. I've never said this about a Graham Motion horse, and I don't blame it on Graham Motion. I think it's more of like an ownership thing. But I feel like she's just always in spots where I just kind of wish she wasn't. And I just feel like she's either going too long, or she's flown too far, or she's coming off of a break, or it's just a bunch of things that just always seem to be happening with Miss Temple City, and she's always overbet. In this spot, I really like the 2 Linda for Witham Racing and for Ian Wilkes. The horses run well and won at Kentucky Downs. In her last start, she was kind of far back closing into some blue pace figures on Time Form US. Her Time Form US number was good last time. She's got a 123, which is definitely fits with this bunch. Miss Temple City is typically a 125, 26 type. So I think she'll be a good square price. And I think she can get it done in this spot.
I don't disagree with Miss Temple City certainly having a lot of like weird checkered things, some missed preps and difficult spots around the world, strange appearances at tracks you wouldn't think she'd go to. Are we at a point now in this pick 4, JK, where you would advise leaving her out completely, or is she a defensive use in the pick 4?
Well, no, I mean, I see. I don't believe in using even money shots or 4 to 5 shots as defensive uses. It's like either if you're going to use a 4 to 5 shot, you either single her or you try to beat her. I don't see. Or if you are going to take the time to construct 2 separate tickets, I could get into that. But if you're going to use the 4 to 5 shot, you need to make sure you're not using it the same as you're using the 5 to 1 shot or 6 to 1 shot. The math on that is just really bad. So, for me, if you can stomach it, if you can stomach losing the 4 to 5, Miss Temple City, who's won 2 grade 1s against the boys, in a grade 3 at Kentucky Downs, if you could stomach her beating you in the first leg of your pick 4, then I would leave her off. But if you're the type that it's going to throw you into a tailspin, then feel free to construct a ticket where you can use her defensively. I'm just not interested in using 4 to 5 shots defensively.
No, that makes sense. This is an odd situation where normally if you were going to use 2 and one was going to be 4 to 5 and one was going to be 5 to 1, you'd probably want to have the 4 to 5 shot 5 times as much as the 2 Linda. But my gut, just hearing you talk about the race, is if I'm going to survive with Miss Temple City, I'm still not going to play her like a 4 to 5 shot, tie up all that capital. I might play her like equally or like half the price of the other horse, not a fifth the price of the other horse. Do you think that's a valid approach in a spot like this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, if you're going to bet it efficiently, that's fine. I mean, I don't even think that like playing ticket maker A, B, and then making her a B horse, I just don't even think that makes a lot of sense. I think you need to make like open up two ticket maker windows, and then decide how much you want to invest on the ticket with Linda, or for me it would be Linda on one ticket, and then how much you want to invest with the Miss Temple City one, and then do it that way. So that you make sure I feel like that would be the most efficient way to go about it.
I like that idea a lot. Let's move on to race 8. It is the Kentucky Downs Ladies Sprint. Boy, they are giving out a lot of money at Kentucky Downs on Saturday. $350,000 purse for this 6.5 furlong race. Some familiar names in here for sure. Where did you land, JK?
Well, I tell you, I know where Austin landed. My son, he picked Morticia, because he loves Rusty Arnold's cat. Rusty Arnold has a barn cat, and Austin is a big fan of that one. So that's where he landed for sure. I'm gonna fall on Lull here. I've always thought that she was talented. I've bet her a few times. I think I tried to beat La Coronel with her. I tried to beat Morticia with her. I've tried to beat a lot of horses with this filly, and maybe it's just a taste too long for her. And now she's going to cut back a little bit here. Her 6 furlong race at Belmont where she broke her maiden was pretty impressive. And so I'm going to give her a shot in this spot with the cutback. I do hope they're going to put her a little bit forward. I know Jack can speak to it a little bit better when you have him on the podcast, or not on the podcast, excuse me, on the handicapping session here coming up soon. But yeah, speed does well at these sprint distances. The races end on kind of an incline, so I think kind of being in position early in the race, or at least I guess late in the race, is beneficial. So I'm going to give Lull a shot. But if you're playing multi-race bets, I wouldn't leave off Fairpoint for Shug with Jose Ortiz. That horse always seems to be running late. Maybe the 5.5 is a little bit too sharp for that one. Getting to an extra half a furlong or furlong here is going to be beneficial for her. So I think she'll come running late. But I'm going to try to get loose here with Lull.
I like it. The thing I noticed right away when you talk about the cutback for Lull, that idea that a more galloping turf sprint, in other words, more testing between the undulations of the course and all the things that make Kentucky Downs unique, that might really favor horses cutting back, almost the same way you see mile forms sometimes hold up really well at the downhill at Santa Anita. And then you look over to Fairpoint and you see the wind down the downhill at Santa Anita. Do you think, how are those two configurations, the downhill at Santa Anita and the 6.5 here at Kentucky Downs, how are they similar and or different to you? Compare and contrast for me.
Well, I would think that they both probably play more like a mile than they do like 6.5. I mean, at least that's what they say about the down the hill. It plays more like a mile race, or mile horses do really well on it. I don't know the exact specifics of the 6.5. Kentucky Downs is kind of new to me in the last couple of years, but I would suggest, I would assume, that with finishing uphill, that's going to kind of test your stamina a little bit. Your ability to finish uphill. So I think they both, especially going from places like Gulfstream and Del Mar and Saratoga, we've been watching 5 and 5.5 furlong turf sprints for the last 3 months. I think that there's probably a little bit of an adjustment to be made for a turf sprint at 6.5 on a course like Kentucky Downs.
Mississippi Delta won this race last year over yielding ground. Do you think that win was a product of the ground? Is she one that's on your radar in here for the Cassie operation?
It's hard to say. It's hard to say whether it was the ground or the course. That was her first run at Kentucky Downs. So it really is hard to say. I tell you what I don't feel great about. I don't like the idea of them preparing her for a 5.5 race at Saratoga, it seemed a little like a confusing campaign. They ran her at 7.5, 2 turns at Gulfstream Park, the weirdest distance in America. Then they run her at 8, and then they run her at 8. Then they run her at 7. Then they're back to 5.5. Now they're up to 6.5. I just think it's a little bit tough. But she's won on the course, so she's definitely one that I would consider.
All right, let's move on to race 9. This is the Grade 3 Turf Sprint. $400,000 on offer here. This is one of the races you did for Out of the Gate this week. What are we calling your Out of the Gate segment now? Did you ever revise the corner? What did you go with?
Yeah, it's the JK play of the day.
I like that. It's got a little bit of rhythm to it, and I'd almost want it to be like pick of the day because you're always giving out some sort of horizontal wager, but nobody asks me these things. What?
Yeah, somebody poked at me the other day on Twitter about that I hadn't had a winner since the Derby.
First of all, I don't think that's true. Second of all, this character just needs to listen to the podcast where you've been giving them out left, right, and center, at least as far as I've been paying attention.
But the problem is that, like, and I know he's a polarizing character in our sport, but I really do honestly believe this. Like a person like Andy Serling, right? Like I find my role, and I think he feels the same way, and I think a lot of other people that have public opinion should feel the same way, is like, my goal is to guide you in a way where, like, you can, like, take my idea and your idea and, like, win.
Yeah.
Like, I don't make those plays where, like, I expect everyone to just, like, blindly bet exactly what I bet. That's not that much fun for you as a player. And then for me, it's like, it's a lot of pressure. but here's the thing though, like, I do that. Like, my ice cold pick 3 that I gave out the other day on the show, I lost that too. If you played it, I lost with you. So, it's more of a guide of where I'm at and what my thoughts are, but, whatever. Some people just blindly play those things and then get mad when you lose, but I guess that's fine.
It's a little silly. There's a huge difference between a public handicapper and a tout also. And to me, the whole tout thing always kind of makes my teeth itch. Because when you get down to it, the idea of being a tout, and the difference is that a tout is someone who you're paying to just basically give you numbers, and you're supposed to be able to follow blindly and win. And I don't know, in my time in the game, I find there's something, and I'm not calling anybody specific out here, I'm sure there are people who have the utmost integrity doing that, but the common criticism of anybody giving out picks comes a little bit more into play there. The old, well, if you really can produce a positive ROI with these magic numbers, why would you be giving them out? The public handicapper, on the other hand, and I agree with what you were saying, JK, I think the job is more to just help somebody see a race in a different way or deepen an understanding of the race in a certain way, and the work is more about an articulate presentation or write-up of knowledge and sharing of what goes into your work process, and you're not asking people to pay directly for it on a one-to-one basis. It's sort of part of the analysis that people like us or Andy or name a public handicapper does in the course of their day-to-day job. So if you're just looking for like that kind of stuff, there's people out there, find a tout you like and go with that, and stop giving people who are obviously doing the work such a hard time. Anyway, I'm off my soapbox now. Let's talk about the 9th at Kentucky Downs on Saturday.
I'm really interested in 2 horses in this spot. I used 2 horses in the double that I gave out. And I'll start with the one that I would probably be the most likely to single if I was forced, and that's Hoagie for Mike Maker. That horse has always been game as ever. Has run at Kentucky Downs once, ran second with a really nice figure.
In this race last year, right?
Right, exactly. So I think that this horse is going to really move up for Mike Maker. And here's one of the things that I got kind of excited about is, the horse has been running at 5.5, and some of his best races have come at 5 and 5.5. One of the things that I think Mike Maker is best at is adding stamina to horses. And if you have any questions about his ability to get more stamina into a horse, look at his record in races that are a mile and a quarter or longer on the grass. It's usually stamina that gets them home. especially with some cheap claimers, he's got winning stakes races. So I would expect that his time he's had Hoagie should be more than enough time to kind of add some stamina to that horse and get him to a position where 6.5 is not going to be a problem for him. And I would think that with his class and a little added stamina, he's going to be pretty tough in this spot. The other horse that I like a lot here that I'm going to use probably presents a little bit more value is Bondurant. It's Ian Wilkes, and I think I signed a contract that today that I have to bet every Brian Hernandez horse because this is the third one that I'm going to be picking. But I like Ian Wilkes. This horse has run twice at Kentucky Downs and has not hit the board, which is a little bit concerning. However, this is a cutback, which always gets me excited when you see these milers cutting back to 6.5, whether it be down the hill or even at Kentucky Downs. So I'm going to give that horse a little bit of a shot. I've been kind of chasing this one around, trying to get him home for the last 6, 7, 8 months, and I think that this could be a spot that he could excel.
I'll also say this. I didn't do the tape work myself, but even just looking at the last 10 races printed in my PDF of the Daily Racing Form, you can see that in that Kentucky Downs race where he was fifth, beaten 2.5, blocked and steadied 1/8. So it's quite possible that the lower speed figure that day wasn't a result of not liking Kentucky Downs so much as it was just a trip situation. Did you watch the tape on that race for Bondurant by chance?
I didn't see it. No, I didn't see that race.
Probably worth going back and taking a look. Those are the kind of things when you're dealing with a super horse-for-course track, and I think you and I both agree, JK, that Kentucky Downs is that. There are some tracks where it seems like horses, move into and out of just the same. Others where they're going to run decidedly better or worse coming in and out. Kentucky Downs falling into that latter category. You don't just need the career box that you mentioned is a great starting point, but go back and look at the races. And if you're a person who can evaluate horses as they're running, take a look and see how the horse was handling the unusual turns, the uphill finish, and you might be able to get some extra clues as to which horse is going to be handling the course or not. Just wanted to underline on Hoagie, this is one of the reasons why Maker's so good, to be able to go ahead and reach in and grab this horse for 80 last time at Saratoga, and then just a few weeks later be running as the 5-2 morning line favorite in a $400,000 stake. You wonder if that was he got lucky and won a multi-way shake that day, or if he was just the only one smart enough to see it. I don't remember how many claims were in, but that's somebody who's playing the claiming game the way that it's meant to be played, and he's only had 2 works since to try to get that added stamina in, but I wouldn't put it past Maker, one bit. You also mentioned, I was going to forget about this, but then you mentioned about your commitment to Hernandez on the day, JK. Have you checked out this new Jockey 7 wager that our friends at Kentucky Downs are doing?
I've seen it. I haven't wagered on it. It's a really cool idea. I think it's just like an interesting thing for people to be able to participate in. I'm not sure what the exact...
I have the rules here, actually. The Jockey 7 wager, and I can practice my cold read for the webinar, too. The Jockey 7 wager allows horse players to bet on individual jockeys over races 4 through 10 on all 5 days of live racing. I think that means individually. The Jockey 7, whose results are based on a point system for top 4 finishes, will be listed as race 11, but will be closed for betting before race 4 each racing day. Bet to win, place, or show if you think several jockeys will have a big day. Group them together in a Group 7 exacta and trifecta. Kentucky Downs will establish 13 groupings of horses, each tied to an individual jockey and a field betting interest that covers the other horses and riders. Each grouping will be assigned a betting number with the final wagering fields and the Jockey 7 morning line posted on KentuckyDowns.com/Jockey7. You got to go on there and bet Hernandez for tomorrow, don't you?
I should. Yeah, you're right. I absolutely should. I need to take a look at that. Yeah, no.
Don't do like you did at Oaklawn and end up with betting into a certain pool, ending up with 50% of it. But figure out the risk and reward and get involved is my advice to you, my friend.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, to be honest. Now that I'm thinking about it. All right, let's key him on top.
Yeah, make it rock and roll. Yeah, you could mess around with the exact or trier. I think I would just go for the just keep it as simple as possible and just bet the man to win. But all right, let's talk about the Kentucky Turf Cup Grade 3. We just got a couple minutes for this one, JK, but I think that'll be all right. What did you end up doing on out of the gate, and do you have any further thoughts on the race?
I use both makers, so I won't just talk about that over and over again because I think that might get a little bit boring.
Why handicap when you can just bet Hernandez and Maker too?
Right, exactly. I picked both the makers. Well, there's actually a bunch of them. I picked Oscar nominated and Todd Glebe. I think they'll both run well here. But the kind of the interesting plays that I had was one I was against the 3 Mukhtasar.
Okay.
I'm against any horse that won on or near the lead at Saratoga on the grass this summer. So any horse that was forward in a slow pace race where they're all up there grabbing, I'm against moving forward. So that horse I'm against. The one that I kind of want to bet, I'm not 100% sure that I can give a bunch of reasons why. And I honestly had no idea when I said this. I'm a little bit nervous that Brian Hernandez is riding. But I thought the 12 Nessie was interesting. Closed into an unbelievably slow pace last time at Saratoga. The pace figures were like an absolute crawl there. I think that horse could run better in this spot. It was 20-1 on the morning line. And what's wrong with Ian Wilkes and Brian Hernandez in another race? I promise I didn't do that on purpose.
Yeah, I said Maker. You can put Wilkes in the mix as well. You've got to bet the Jockey 7 tomorrow. We're all going to cash on Brian Hernandez. We must pause for 1 second to talk about the Maker who you didn't mention, Jonathan, and that's number 7, Enterprising. Did you have a knock here?
It wasn't necessarily a knock. It's just it's taken a long time for Maker to get this horse going kind of that 1.5 mile distance. In fact, I don't think he's done it since he's had him, and that's not typical Maker. If he thinks a horse will stretch out and can steal money, he'll do it. The last race at 1.25 miles was the first time he's run over 1 1/8 miles since he's been in Maker's care, and so finally getting him to the 1.5 miles seems a little bit late to the party. So that was the reason I couldn't get interested in that one.
Now, I'm kind of bummed, man, because I just wrote down what my closing line for the show was going to be today, and then I forgot that the closing line is already on this pre-recorded segment I'm about to play, so I can't say win all your Brian Hernandez Jockey 7 photos. I'm not going to be able to close the show with that. But that's about it, Jonathan. I think we've covered some decent ground today. We've got the segment coming up. Did you have a closing thought before you become a listener and we roll this Scott Gramling tape?
Yeah, I think that Kentucky Downs, and you can tell CJ I told him this, that he should make like the turf sprint purse like $350 instead of $400 and buy Trackus.
Oh, very interesting. Very interesting. Does that math work?
No, I don't know if it does.
I doubt it does.
Probably not. But it's tough to watch with the angles there. It's hard to see what's going on. So Trackus would make it a little bit easier to follow. But what a great meet.
That would be a quick and dirty way. It is true. The production values, I think, running 5 days a year can be a little tricky. I would argue it's worth putting up with and watching enough tape and trying to get used to what's unusual about it because of all the things they do well. Kentucky Downs has, everything horse players say they want in terms of competitive racing and full fields, et cetera, et cetera. So they do a lot of good stuff. Trackus would be a fun idea. I'm not going to mention that, however, on the Kentucky Downs sponsored webinar. I value my job too much, Jonathan.
Makes sense.
Okay. Let's go to the audio tape. And now I'd like to welcome to the DRF Players podcast a first-time guest and someone whose work I've admired from afar for a while. He is Scott Gramling, the managing editor of StatFox, which, of course, is the home of the Platinum Sheet. Scott, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, right? Getting ready for the first big weekend of pro football. Doesn't get any better than this. Everybody's 0-0, so got a good long season ahead of us, and certainly a great time of year.
The possibilities are endless when everybody has that 0-0 in the scorebook.
Right? No losses.
Well, I want to talk to you about your approach to betting the NFL early on in the season. I also want to ask you about generally how in these first weeks, before we really know who the teams are, how you approach your handicapping. Let's start with that second question, actually. Do you tend to tread lightly in terms of your predictions and any bets you might make during the early part of the season, or do you dive in head first?
I dive in head first. I look at this part of the season as here's an opportunity where if I've done my homework, and at Staff Fox, we certainly do our homework. We have a 177-page Edge preview guide for the season. I feel like I might have a leg up at this point if I've done my homework, and I have, over what the odds makers might have. So I go in. I think if you're waiting around, during that time you wait, the market has a chance to correct itself. You kind of want to pounce on it where there's some inefficiencies that you can perceive in the lines based on the homework you've done. And I think the beginning of the football season is the perfect time for that.
One thing I admire about the Platinum Sheet is the way that it blends different kinds of analysis. There is a computer model element, which I imagine strengthens as the season goes along, but there's also some old school NFL handicapping in there as well. In terms of your own interest, where do you lie? Are you more of an analytics guy? Do you consider yourself more of an old school and trends guy? Talk about your approach a little bit.
Yeah, I really like to start with betting systems. And betting systems from trends in that they are more global. So it's not like, Team X is this record against the spread on Monday nights or whatever. It's more a team coming off a big loss or a team that ends the season with consecutive losses, playing as an underdog. I mean, to me, those are really what I look at first. And then I take it and does it make sense and does it really fit with what the profiles of these teams are? So I guess I kind of mix the man and machine part of it, if you will, kind of the qualitative and the quantitative. But I do have to say that in the end, when I'm making my final decision, I really do want the betting systems and the analytics to hold up. I'm not a guy that will go with my quote-unquote gut. I don't necessarily go against my gut, but I think it tends to get a bit dangerous if you start trying to put your mind in the mind of these teams. And I think it's where a lot of people often go wrong, where they kind of reckon, this team's out for blood. They want to avenge that loss from last season. I think you should kind of take a step back. I think sometimes we can get caught up in the mainstream media stuff where they're really like, oh, these teams hate each other. Oh, the Ravens and the Steelers, they're just they've circled this game on the calendar for weeks. I don't think that's the way the NFL works these days. I think. Not to de-romanticize it, but you're talking about 53 independent contractors on each side of the ball, and there's certainly tendencies that have played out over time, but I think too much can often be read into what the mainstream media is trying to do to get you hyped up to watch the games. They're out to get ratings. They're not giving you a snapshot of what's really going on the football field.
That makes sense to me. I mean, we see certain false narratives in horse racing all the time, and I think folks are better off when they can stick to the data. At the same time, you mentioned that the sort of gut check you'll make once you have a play based on something analytical. And for me, often that gut check will come into play in terms of how much to bet, a risk and reward situation. I've heard it said that the many of the worst, but a few of the very best bets are made based on feel. And for me, that's where that comes into the equation. Is it something similar for you with football handicapping?
It's very similar, Pete. I think that's a good way to put it. And I often make the analogy to a pilot, right? A pilot is supposed to, when he's flying a plane, trust his instruments. And that's what I try and do, is trust my instruments. But you sometimes know inherently, because of how often you've flown that plane, you know what, things just aren't going right here. I don't really believe what I'm seeing. And that's when you kind of go away from the instruments and kind of start to let feel take over. Now, if you're going to continue through with this analogy with the pilot, that's not very often that should happen, right? That's I'd say 99 times out of 100, I think you're trusting your instruments for the most part because you've done the work to put these systems in place to know that you can rely on them, at least for one aspect of the handicapping. But by all means, there's certain things you're just like, you know what, I've seen this before. I've seen something similar. I can't quite put my finger and recall it exactly, but I just have a feel that this is the way this is going to go, and for these reasons, and you go with it. And you tend to be right 50% of the time.
That's about right. The old spidey senses tingle. They don't always lead us to a payday. But it is interesting way to look at the world. Let's look at the world in terms of a little bit of specifics here. Now, we're not going to give away the store. Folks can obviously order the Platinum Sheet for the season. You can go to statfox.com to get all the information. But it does sound like you're willing to release a couple of your opinions on what we might see on the football field on this opening weekend. Let's talk about some specific games first, and then we'll peel back and maybe look at a season over under or two. Is there anything you're particularly interested in wagering on Sunday?
Yeah, I'm looking at the Sunday night game, the Giants-Cowboys game. I mean, this is something that these games have been tight, and this is also a game, and you often find this in certain divisional rivalries where home field doesn't mean a heck of a lot. Teams have familiarity with each other. You look at what the Giants have done against the Cowboys, 4-0 against the spread since the start of the 15 season. But I think what I really put more stock in is that only once in the 12 meetings between these teams since the start of 2011 have the Cowboys won by more than a touchdown. I think that 3.5 on the surface doesn't look like a big spread, but in NFL handicapping, it's huge. And it really seems to have all the feel and the makings of a 3-point game. This is one of those, the team that has the ball last. It just seems to play out that way when the Giants are playing the Cowboys. And, I think those numbers where I just mentioned, only once in the last 12 meetings, have the Cowboys won by more than a touchdown. And, you could argue the Cowboys, they're not the Browns, right? They're fielding competitive, strong teams year in and year out. So, to me, getting that 3.5 points is I have to take the points in that game. And, it just, to me, it feels like 20-17 or 24-21, one way or the other. So if I'm getting the points, certainly going there. I also think that game's going under the total. I think that it's a pretty high total, relatively speaking, at 40. When you're looking at a couple of teams that defensively a couple of years ago were toward the bottom of the league, but since then have really shored up their defenses. So I like the Giants and under on Sunday night. One of the games I like Sunday during the day is I like Houston laying 5.5. I think this Houston team is going to be improved. It's a Houston team that is well coached and consistently wins the game they're supposed to win. And this is certainly one of those games going up against Jacksonville. I mean, giving less than a touchdown at home against the Jaguars. Jaguars are a bit of a mess. You look at since Bill O'Brien took over as head coach in Houston, the team's 15-5-1 against the spread when favored. They've given up an average of only 14.3 points per game in those 21 games. Park includes 8-2 against the spread at home as a favorite between 3.5 and 7 points. And I just think when you look at the Jaguars, they've started the season so poorly so often in recent years. 0-4 both straight up and against the spread over the last 4 season openers. You look at the Jaguars over the first 5 weeks of the season since the start of 2011, 5-5 straight up, 6-22-2 against the spread. A mess of a quarterback situation. And when you don't have stability in your ownership, your head coach, your quarterback, those key positions, that often leads to slow starts. And I think that can be the expectation again. I think there are some high hopes in Houston that they're going to be better than a year ago when they reached the second round of the playoffs. And I think Jacksonville, with more turnover in the offseason, is a team that come mid-season could end up being competitive in these kinds of games, but to me is completely overmatched right out of the gate.
Well, it's a very well-reasoned argument, some things that we'll be taking a look to see how they turn out on Sunday. Let's pull back the lens a minute and talk about the season as a whole. When you look over the slate of team over-unders, are there any matchups in particular, well, not matchups, but are there any numbers in particular you're interested in betting over or under for the season?
Yeah, I can't slice any way that the Baltimore Ravens will be winning 9 or more games. I think the Ravens are a below-average team, and I think they play in a tough division, a relatively difficult schedule. Yes, they get the Browns twice, but those Steelers games and games against the Bengals are always hard-fought. I think Ravens under 9 is as good a bet as there is on the board. I think that this is a team that gets that kind of a number because of reputation, because of the fact that John Harbaugh is such a good coach. The Ravens are known for playing that solid defense, but those heyday defenses are a thing of the past. We have Ray Lewis and Ed Reed and some of those guys in the defense getting up there in age. I just think they're in a bit of a transition. And I think Joe Flacco comes into the season banged up. I think that's an element as well. So to me, Ravens under 9, I think is the best bet on the board. I mentioned the Texans in the context of their opening against the Jaguars. I like the Texans over 8.5. I don't necessarily think they're a great team, but if you look at the schedule, you look at the division, right? Andrew Luck is banged up for the Colts. Jaguars are in a state of flux. The Titans are improved, but you could certainly see Houston going 4-2, maybe even 5-1 in the 6 games in the division, and at that point, they're well on their way to a season where they should be 9 or 10 games. So. To me, that's my favorite over. I do like the Ravens under a bit better, but I think you can look at Houston there, and to me, you just look at the contrast of those two teams. Which team's going to win more games? And to me, it's kind of a no-brainer that Houston is in a better position to win more games than what Baltimore is.
I like it. Good stuff. Thank you for sharing that. Before I let you go, really quick, I understand that you are a New England Patriots fan to the point where you rarely miss a home game. What's your prognosis for your favorite team, if you can give me an objective one for this season?
If anything, I don't give the Patriots as much credit as I should year in and year out because, if I bet with my heart on them, I'd probably be retired at this point based on how many games and championships they've look, they're stacked. They from top to bottom, they have a solid team. They've got great coaching. We talk about that stability in ownership, head coaching, and quarterback. And the Patriots have that to an extent greater than maybe any team we've seen in the last generation. I think a bet on them to win the Super Bowl is just so tough because it just isn't there. I did research. I could not find another time when a team was 7-2 to win the Super Bowl. I mean, that's unheard of. Even those kind of dominant Cowboys and 49ers teams of 20 or so years ago always kind of had each other to get over. Remember, the Bears were good back then as well. So, you really couldn't find you get 6-1 even on the favorites back then. So, I think it's just tough at 7-2. Too much can happen over the course of the season to take that kind of a price. I guess what I would like better is over 12.5. I do think that the Patriots are set up with a weak division. They should be going 5-1 or 6-0 in the division when you look at the Jets, Bills, and Dolphins. And not a terribly tough schedule. I think it's hard to go through the schedule and pick out 4 games that you would say the Patriots are going to lose. I know there's talk of perfect season. I think that's hogwash. I think, there is still a certain any given Sunday element to NFL football. But to me, I'm bullish on the Patriots. I prefer over 12.5 than I do taking them to win the Super Bowl. Just too much that can happen at such a harsh price.
Yeah, that Super Bowl bet sounds like something we talk about in racing all the time, where there's a horse who's the most likely winner by far, but the price doesn't justify the risk. There's still a lot of risk and reward stuff in NFL betting as well. Well, Scott, I've kept you longer than I said. You were too interesting, and I thank you for sticking around and enjoyed it so much. I'd love to have you back on again soon to talk about all this stuff as the season goes.
I'd love to do it.
Awesome.
I'd love to do it. This is a lot of fun. I appreciate the time, Pete. I really do.
Very cool. Just to remind folks, statfox.com is the website. The premium product is the platinum sheet. Lots of great information in there. Check it out. Scott, if folks want to follow you and get more information from you, are you a Twitter person?
I'm not a Twitter person. I guess I should become one. But,
I think so. The way you talk about this stuff, I was thinking we were going to get you, 1,000 new followers here. But what do we? But
in due time, I guess I got to step into the 21st century in that regard, don't I?
I recommend it. But thanks for having you on. We'll have you back soon. And that's all the time we have for this week's edition of the DRF Players Podcast. I'd like to thank Jonathan Kitchen, and I'd like to thank Scott Gramling. We will have you back on soon. If you're playing this weekend, whether it's horses or NFL metaphorically, may you win all your photos.